Thank you, Simon. And before I begin, I would like to mention that I've been a part of this DataEng community for quite a few years, and I've seen it grow and thrive. And to that note, I would really like to give a shout out to the community here for, really acknowledging the importance of data and building this community ground up. So thank you for being a part of it. Today I'm going to talk about crossing the proverbial river by feeling the stone or data. It's a bit of an abstract topic, so it's a heads up. I'm going to intermix the abstract concepts with the technology and present it to you. A bit of my musing or my own interpretation of how we can do better when we are building data-driven products. So much about my talk is going to be a consumer aspect, not so much about the data engineering. Given a data, how can we use the data and model it into a useful product and a solution, and what that journey should be, how do we actually feel it, is the crux of my talk. But I will take you through as I proceed in my content. With that, let me find my clicker. So before I mention and go into the detail, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. So I'm Suneeta, I head of AI engineering department at Harrison. Effectively, my team is responsible for building the AI component, the models that identify malignancy or clinical abnormality into radiology or pathology content that medical professionals look at. And the idea is that the professionals use these products to as a guiding means, or they use it as a second opinion when they make their final diagnosis. And the whole purpose is to accelerate the medical consultation and also to accelerate, scale the healthcare and democratize the healthcare, because right now the entire industry is effectively falling short of medical professionals. So that's my current role. In past, I have done various different roles, specifically around AI and engineering, just focusing on a scale aspect of it. And I love learning. I've been an ongoing learner, and as a part of that, I do write. I've written IBM books in past, and I also have written children's book as well. If you do have little kids, please check out Curious Cassie. And this book is also coming out early next year. That's almost going through the final touches, but it's available in a raw, unedited format on the O'Reilly platform. And so if you find interested in learning deep learning at scale, or interested in what lies at the intersection of hardware, software, and data, then please do check this out. As for me, I am, like I said, engineer, and the data is a big part of who I am. I think what has driven me up until now is guiding the process of development by means of data, which is some of the inspiration that you will see through in my rest of the conversation. So let me put a shape to my content. I'm going to talk about the motivation of this talk first, and then I will touch on what do we mean by deep learning, data in deep learning, through a different lens. Deep learning has penetrated the current technology scenario that I take it for granted that you all have a very good understanding of the role of data in deep learning, but I'm going to put a different lens to it. And then I'm going to talk about how can we make data a first-class citizen, where data is really effectively your guiding force, or how do you actually do the development by feeling it through the process. And then we can open the floor and take your questions, and we can have a bit of a debate. So motivation really is coming from this very interesting talk that I attended a few years back at QCon. Went there to do my own technical presentation, and Simon Wadley from Leading Edge Forum, he presented this really interesting talk called Crossing the River by Feeling the Stones. He is strategic himself, and a lot about his talk was how do you navigate uncharted territory to really come out successful. And he talked through several of his failures to sort of build a bit of a mental model to how do you succeed. And a lot of in his thinking process, he used Tan Tzu's Art of War as a motivation, which is sort of depicted in this figure. And it's also very closely aligned with OODA loop. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but I'll give you a very quick 2-minute summary, but I do encourage you to go back and have a look at actually this talk and even the book that has very interesting content. But what this really presents is that it's an infinite cycle, this is a continuous improvement, is an infinite cycle where you start with a purpose and then you drive it by the moment. And it's a combination of you first understand what your purpose define what you're trying to build, your landscape defined on how you are grounding your concept or what you are going to base it on, and your climate is defining how you are shaping your purpose. Dr. Ryan is essentially the tools, process, and practice that you adopt, and the leadership in this context, essentially in the data-driven product, is you. As in you as a leader, you trying to model the data-driven products, you are the leader, and effectively then start with a purpose, understand what you're trying to do, how do you shape it and to take the best out of it with the tools that you have available and continually keep doing it. That is my interpretation of how I am looking at it in that data-driven product development aspect. So the TLDR here is that the use of data in AI is fundamentally iterative. And also it's not just iterative, it's very much strategic. We cannot get the best out of it unless we understand what is it that it is telling, what story it has, and what nuances it's carrying. You might have heard this phrase around, shit goes in, shit comes out. It is actually true, but also whatever goes in is whatever comes out. So the more you understand and feel it, and the more you guide it, is effectively what you get at the end of this process. So going back to this proverb of feeling, crossing this proverbial river by feeling the stone, is effectively about understanding your data every step along the way. And why I say that is because to build an AI or an ML or a deep learning product, it's very much about finding that optimal spot where your model is learning something. So it's basically, it's not underfitting, or it's learning so much well on the data that it has seen that it cannot do anything good on the data that it hasn't seen. So basically overfitting. Finding that optimal spot between the two is effectively the right solution, lies in that space. And if we talk about in terms of swimming, this is more about how do you start swimming? You start feeling the riverbed, the rocks, and start to travel in, and start to feel the water and then figure out how to really float. But effectively, that's the process of knowing what the raw matter you are dealing with. So with that, let me bring this figure, which is the general standard workflow model. In 2023, I think technologically we are advanced enough that we appreciate the value of high quality data, full system end-to-end integration where you are continuously iterating over the data set to improve not only the quality of the data, but also continuously improve the model in the process. So you start with version 1, you iterate with it with newer data, and you continuously revise. And if you are, if you work in one of those organizations where you're continually iterating over that labeling data set, that means that you have a power to build a very high quality data set. But effectively, you still are dealing with the only one aspect of feeling the data, which is just the quality aspect. And that's where it's not enough. This is effectively, it's just one aspect of it. And where it falls short is you probably would have seen this meme that talks about the problem of not approaching the data as a systematic problem or just focusing on AI aspect, like, say for example, quality, and you end up with a accrued tech debt or accrued volume of data that you just don't have a good sense of what it contains, and the problem that then just amplifies. So if we take a different lens and we say, how can we do the development with a more data-centric view, which is effectively what we are trying to do. We are trying to build this data-driven product, but we need to understand more about this data and what would the mental model be like. And I would kind of like argue that first you define the problem and then you start to understand, is that data good enough to start iterating on? And once you understand that enough and you can start to make progress, then you ask yourself a question, is my data high quality enough? Do I need to, is that optimized enough to give me the best value? And you start to think about, do I need to balance it? Do I need to prune it? Do I need to clean it? And then you go ahead and do the development. But I think there is something wrong here, and let's fix it. The fixing is more about connecting the dots back to the loop and making it a bit more iterative cycle. Now, I would argue that you can look at it as an OODA loop now. There is a cycle here, you are iterating onto it, but you are not iterating just from a data quality viewpoint or just from model development viewpoint. There is a lot in this about high quality development. You are basically departing from volume and much talking about the effectiveness and optimization of how much data I use so I can get the best result for my purpose. And with that, I kind of would give you a bit more concrete sense to what that would look like. And before I go and talk about the concrete examples of how we can realize this, let's talk about these 7 V's of data. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. It's quite a popular terminology, but it really talks about 7 different spectrums or characteristics. One being the variety, which is very important in AI development. The more variety you have of the samples, the more stronger the model would be to be able to delineate between different aspects of it and into the right categories. And then you start talking about veracity, which is the quality. And I touched on earlier, a lot of the time you worry about, do I have a good quality data set? Do I have appropriateness of the data is suitable, and that sort of falls into that variety bucket. Then you have volatility. How long can I use this data? Once it disappears, what does it mean for us? And then velocity is very much the big data problem, and I'm just going to park it, but it's a one big characteristic of it. And then it is the validity, which is different from veracity, where validity is more about, is it right purpose? Your data can still be very good quality, but just not the right suit for what you are trying to do. And the last one being the value. You can have a large volume of data set, but if it's not giving you the right value, then the volume is kind of pointless. So how can we maximize on the capital that we have by effectively pseudo-feeling it to get the better results is essentially can be leveraged by these 7 dimensions of the data. So with that as an introduction, let me touch on 3 different points to see how that can happen. And starting with the veracity, which is quality, and we've already, very high level talked about some of these concepts around model in the loop, human in the loop, to continuously keep improving the quality of the data, using multiple labelers to give you feedback to improve it, or getting from different sources to sort of by denoising, you get better, more accurate data. Those techniques have existed for a while now. The problem with these techniques are they are not scalable, because you always need to spend more money to get consensus and handle that aspect. But now there are techniques where you can effectively automate these veracity aspects of it. One of this technique is effectively called confident learning, and I don't want to take this data conference and translate that into ML aspect of it, but effectively, there are libraries available, things like CleanLab, that effectively models or take all that ML complexity away from you. If you can just treat it as a input in and output as how accurate your data is or how accurate your samples are. And if we can look at it from that lens, then you could effectively take your data systems as a platform and start to say, how can we improve the veracity or a quality of our data set at a scale without spending a significant amount of sum to really get a high quality data set. And that's one side of it. The example here really is demonstrating how identification of a bad labeling on an aeroplane on a runway has been missed by a labeler, where the system tells that there is actually an aeroplane. It's also an aeroplane, and it's also a runway, but the labeler's annotation has sort of just stopped that at runway. And with this system, you effectively don't even use a human in the loop. It's effectively just trying to understand the general distribution and models and tells where your veracity would be low. And somehow using these techniques, you can really accelerate the quality. The other aspect is value, and it's probably the most underappreciated aspect in my view. And a lot about, if we talk about data-driven products, a lot about is just guiding what data is telling to get the best outcome. Some of the times, you might have examples that are so easy that the model can just learn to do in the first go, and it doesn't really need to say it again and again. In general, in model development, you generally show it hundreds or thousands or billion times, the same example for the model to learn. But in that 100% of the sample distribution, a lot of the time 60% are just good enough to be shown only once. So you may not necessarily need to show the entire sample all that billion times and spend millions of dollars on your compute. So if we could, in a world, if we could bucket them to the sample only useful to show once is good enough, and a sample that are very crucial to the success story, but they need to be shown repeatedly to maintain the knowledge, then that's bucket. And the third bucket, that the samples that are really hard to learn, that no matter how many times you show, the model just doesn't learn, then you can revise your strategy and be more data strategic in your approach to the development. And that's what the story of value is telling here. There is this very interesting paper here that's kind of linked on the slides, and I don't really expect all you guys to sort of dive into the solution, but really it's just talking about looking at the implementation and how you can use an implementation as a software, ML ops, or a data engineering problem, and plug that into your system to now understand and feel the data, to really say that these are the simple samples. I don't need to show a million times because the value is really achieved in that one go. And these are the samples that to really be effective, I need to be showing this to model consistently until I have obtained the result I want. Then you can be more strategic in your training process, in your data program, in your data-driven solutions. And that's sort of the spectrum on the value-driven development for data-driven product. Again, too many data and driven there, but that's a crux of this sort of problem. And then the last one is volume. We live in the era of enormity. There is the bigness is all around us. There is big data, big volume everywhere, and we are loving it, but also we are paying the price for it. If your organization is paying the data storage cost, if they are paying the budget for compute that's happening on that, you probably feel the crunch of the big data. But is all of that worth it? Do we really need to use all that data? Can we compress it in a much more effective sense that you retain the knowledge that you need to build your data-driven product, but throw away the things that you don't need? And that's essentially that volume lens to it. And again, this is that distillation work that, again, I've linked the work here, but you could effectively look at it as just a solutioning problem. How do you implement your system in a way that the data is effectively, appropriately used from a volume. Too big or too less, both are the wrong spectrum. The right spectrum is just good enough. And those are the three lenses, but like, a bit of a marketing there. There's a chapter in the book that talks a lot about these solutions and how to accelerate and scale your solutions. There's hands-on as well. So, but I do want to hear more from you and see if you have any questions on this, or if we can have any philosophical debate on this. So I'll take a pause, but I would really like to thank you for listening to me, and thank you.